In this video, we'll talk about two common swing errors that most amateurs have that very few playing professionals have. Take a second or two, best guesses. We'll be right back to talk about it. Well, what a great Masters week, right? Tiger won. Just a very exciting week. Wonderful to watch. I enjoyed it thoroughly, as I'm sure you did. Over the last week, we had the privilege of doing another corporate event for Masters Week and working with probably 50 different golfers from all over the United States and Europe, and just a fine bunch of people. Loved talking to every one of you and giving you some ideas on what you can do to improve. That was a lot of fun. So two of the common things that I observed and kind of discussed with people as they came along was, number one, a lot of really poor grips. In most cases, the lead hand players had it much too high in the palm. That was even more noticeable than any kind of variations, strong or weak, just very high in the palm. Next problem that I saw was typically the trail hand was either, not often, but sometimes too weak, but a lot of times just well under the shaft. So a lot of, unfortunately, very strange looking grips that caused either golf balls to go a lot left or a lot right. So I would encourage you, there's so much good information on everything now pertaining to the golf swing that you can find, and I'm sure got some videos on our channel about the grip. Just go over that, okay, and make sure your grip's pretty fundamentally sound, especially if you're having trouble with directional control. And the second thing that most amateurs showed that tour pros don't was in transition. A lot of you guys are very steep in the early downswing. So if you're new to golf, what that means is basically in the early start of the downswing, the shaft is going to point too much inside the toe ball line, versus most of the better players are going to have the shaft kind of shallow or point outside the target line. And so the issue with that is that when you get to longer clubs, it becomes much harder to control where you hit it on the sweet spot, what the face does. The path usually gets, well, it gets very steep. The plane gets very steep. Some people can recover and go from steep to shallow. Some people are gonna just stay steep and come over the top. But it makes those longer clubs really hard to hit. And the good news is you find a competent teacher. And one of the first things I would do, go into a lesson, would go, okay, here's a couple things I'd like to work on, but first, please check my grip. Second, let's take a good look with your camera at my downswing and see if I'm steep in transition, because, like I said, that's very common. There's a couple different ways to fix it, which we won't get into in this video, but those are two things everyone who doesn't play golf for a living, who doesn't have a lot of time to practice, who's not playing a lot but wants to get a little better, there's two key parts of your swing that you should check: how you hold the club and how that shaft's moving in the early part of the downswing. Those two things will give you some much better results once you start to work on them.